The scent of ammonia and lemon disinfectant was the smell of safety. It was the smell of being invisible, a ghost in a light blue cleaner's dress and a starched white apron, haunting the 68th floor of the Apex Tower. For 3 years, Jasmine had perfected the art of non-existence. She kept her head down, her movements efficient, her presence as forgettable as a smudge on a window pane. She knew the rhythm of this place better than her own heartbeat. She knew the precise click of the elevator arriving at 7 a.m. with the finance team, the hushed whisper of the legal department at noon, and the heavy, confident footsteps that announced the arrival of the man who owned it all. Tonight, she was on her hands and knees, the cold marble floor leaching warmth from her skin through her thin uniform. Her world was reduced to the rhythmic slide and squeak of a damp cloth against polished stone, erasing the day's scuffs and footprints. A pail of graying water sat beside her. This was her ritual, her penance, her hiding place. She heard the private elevator chime, a soft, melodic tone that always made the hairs on her arms stand up. It was late, past midnight. Only one person used that elevator at this hour. She didn't look up. Looking up was a mistake. Looking up got you noticed. Instead, she focused on a stubborn black mark near the base of a potted ficus, scrubbing with a focused intensity that was entirely for show. Her entire body was an antenna, tuned to the sound of his approach. The footsteps were silent at first, on the plush runner that led from the elevator bank. Then they hit the marble. The sound was distinct, hand-stitched Italian leather on stone. A sound that cost more than her entire life. They slowed, then stopped, not 5 feet from her. Jasmine's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Keep moving. You are furniture. You are shadow. She dipped her cloth back into the pail, wrung it out, and continued her circular motions. Don't stop. Don't look. Don't breathe. He didn't move. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, pressing down on her. It was wrong. He never stopped. He moved through this floor like a shark through water, constant, forward momentum. She could feel his gaze on the crown of her head, on the curve of her spine. A prickling heat spread across her skin. Then, a soft metallic clink. Something small had fallen, rolling to a stop just beside her pail. A cufflink. Platinum, shaped like a stylized dragon, with a single, perfect black diamond for an eye. She had given it to him. For their first anniversary. A lifetime ago. Her breath hitched. The cloth in her hand froze. This was it. The fragile, invisible walls of her sanctuary were about to shatter. Slowly, as if in a dream, he bent down. Not a full crouch, but an elegant hinge from the waist, the charcoal gray fabric of his Tom Ford suit pulling taut across his broad shoulders. He wasn't reaching for the cufflink. His focus was entirely on her. She could feel it, a physical weight. That's when she made the mistake of looking up. 3 years dissolved in an instant. His face was the same, yet terrifyingly different. The lines around his eyes were sharper, carved deeper, as if by a blade. His black hair was styled with the same impeccable precision, but there was no warmth in his expression, none of the faint softness she remembered from a life before this one. His eyes, dark and depthless, widened almost imperceptibly. They held shock, confusion, and something else, something cold and dangerous that hadn't been there before. His lips parted. He said her name. Not shouted, not questioned, but a low, guttural whisper that seemed torn from his soul. Jasmine. The sound of her own name from his mouth was a physical blow. It was a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for 1,000 days. 2 of his ever-present guards, silent monoliths in black suits, took a half-step forward, their hands moving inside their jackets. He raised one hand, a flicker of a gesture, and they froze. His eyes never left hers. He straightened up, the recovered cufflink clutched in his fist.
"Get up," he commanded. His voice was different now.
Not the ghost of a whisper, but the flat, absolute tone of a man who had never been disobeyed. Her limbs felt like lead. She pushed herself up, her knees protesting, her hands slick with dirty water. She stood before him, small and insignificant in her faded uniform, the smell of bleach clinging to her. He was Kwon Tae-hyun, the man she had once called her husband, the man who now ran Seoul's underworld with surgical, terrifying precision, the man she had run from to save her own life. He reached out, and his fingers wrapped around her upper arm. His grip was like steel. Not bruising, but inescapable. A claim. You will come with me. It wasn't a request. The world tilted on its axis. The past had finally caught up to her, and its hold was absolute. He pulled her toward the private elevator, his long strides forcing her into a clumsy half-jog. The guards fell in behind them, their faces impassive masks. The pristine marble floor she had just cleaned reflected their procession like a distorted mirror. The elevator doors slid open. He pushed her inside, the space suddenly claustrophobic, all mirrored steel and dim, recessed lighting. He stood across from her, his presence sucking all the air from the small car. The door slid shut, sealing them in a suffocating silence. Her reflection stared back at her, a terrified woman in a janitor's uniform, held captive by a ghost in a $1,000 suit. The carefully constructed piece of her hidden life was over. The man she had escaped had found her, and as the elevator began its silent, swift descent, she knew, with chilling certainty, that he would never let her go again. The elevator opened directly into his penthouse. The door slid apart to reveal a cavernous space of glass, chrome, and black leather that seemed to float over the glittering expanse of Seoul. The city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. It was a cold, beautiful prison, utterly devoid of personal touches. It was not a home. It was a fortress. Taehyun's grip on her arm didn't loosen until they were in the center of the vast living room. He released her so abruptly she stumbled. He stood watching her, his face an unreadable mask of fury and something else she couldn't name.
Pain.
3 years, he said, his voice dangerously low. 3 years I had my men searching every morgue, every hospital, every back alley from here to Busan. I attended a funeral. I buried an empty casket. Jasmine. I mourned you. Her throat was tight. She had no words. What could she possibly say? You are working on the 68th floor, he said it not as a question, but as a statement of profound, almost insane irony. He ran a hand through his perfect hair, the first sign of disarray she had ever seen in him. My building. My floor. Wiping my floors.
Why?
To be invisible, she whispered, finding her voice. It came out hoarse. No one looks at the cleaning staff. It was the last place you would ever think to search. The safest place I could think of. He laughed, a short, bitter sound with no humor in it. Safe? From who? From me. From this, she said, gesturing vaguely at the opulent cage around them, at the men who stood like statues by the door, at the cold, lethal man he had become. From the world that tried to kill me. The memory was still sharp, a shard of glass in her mind. The screech of tires, the black sedan forcing her car off the road. The men who dragged her out. She'd escaped, barely, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a terror so profound it had bleached the world of all color. She had run, and she hadn't stopped running until she'd found the most audacious hiding place of all. The men who came for you that day were from the Park family, Taehyun said, his voice flat and hard. I had just made my move against their shipping interests. They took you to get to me. I dealt with them. You dealt with them? She repeated, a bitter taste in her mouth. What does that even mean, Taehyun? Did you deal with them before or after you let them think they'd succeeded? Before or after you let the world, let me, believe I was on my own? His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching along the sharp line. I sent you away for your own protection. I put you on a plane to America with enough money to disappear. I told you not to contact me until I sent word. The car was ambushed on the way to the airport. She shot back, her fear finally giving way to a spark of the old fire he used to know. Your men were dead before they hit the ground. I ran into the woods. I hid in a ditch for 2 days. When I finally made it back to the city, I heard the news. Kwon Taehyun's young wife, tragically killed in a car accident. You declared me dead, Taehyun. You let them win. That was his wound. She could see it now, clear as day. It wasn't just her disappearance. It was his failure. The one time his power, his reach, his legendary control had failed, it was to protect her. And he had lived with that failure for 3 years. I thought you were gone, he said, the words raw. Believing you were dead was the only way to justify what I did to the Park family in return. It was the only way I could live with myself. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. And now you are here, a ghost. Do you have any idea what this means? Park's son is in charge now. He's been looking for a weakness, any crack in my empire. And I just brought it up to my penthouse, in a cleaning uniform. The danger she had been running from wasn't over. It had just been dormant. Her reappearance was a lit match in a room full of gasoline. He turned away from her, pacing before the wall of glass. You will stay here. You will not leave this apartment. Minjun, he barked, and one of the guards stepped forward. No one gets in or out without my direct authorization. Get her some clothes.
Food.
Whatever she needs. She is not to be left alone. It was a cage, just a more luxurious one. For the next 2 days, she existed in a state of suspended animation. She ate food she didn't taste, wore clothes of silk and cashmere that felt alien against her skin, and watched the man who was once the center of her universe move through his life with a cold, detached efficiency. He worked from a large desk in the corner, his calls a quiet murmur of commands and threats. He barely spoke to her, but she felt his eyes on her constantly. He was watching her, studying her, as if trying to reconcile the woman he remembered with the janitor he'd found. On the 3rd night, the tension broke. He was on a call, his back to her, his voice tighter than usual. She caught snippets. Park's moving product through the old fish market, unconcealed, arrogant. Jasmine's blood ran cold. The fish market. She remembered the gossip from the other cleaners, the old women who had worked in the city their whole lives. They talked about everything. A few weeks ago, they'd been complaining about new security at the Norwegian market, about rough-looking men chasing them out of the old, abandoned warehouses at the far end. They'd called them Park's dogs. Taehyun hung up the phone, his hand clenched into a fist on the desk. He was planning something, a direct confrontation. And from the sound of it, he was walking into a trap. She made a choice. She could stay silent, stay a ghost, and let him walk into whatever fate awaited him. Or she could speak. It's a setup, she said, her voice clear in the quiet room. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. What did you say? The fish market. Park's men aren't being arrogant. They're being obvious. They want you to see them. They want you to come. She stood up, walking toward him. The women I worked with, they said Park's men have been clearing out the old warehouses for weeks. It's not a transport hub. It's a kill box. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. He was assessing her, the source, the credibility. For a moment, she thought he would dismiss her, the janitor. But then he picked up his phone and dialed. Minjun, change of plans. Pull our men back from the market. I want satellite surveillance on all access points to the Norwegian warehouses.
Now.
He hung up and looked at her. The silence between them was different now. It wasn't empty or hostile.
It was charged.
He had listened. He had trusted her. Later that night, he came back from a meeting, a thin, angry cut bleeding just above his eyebrow. He'd clearly been in some kind of altercation, one his men had finished. He walked to the bar and poured a whiskey, dabbing at the cut with the back of his hand, smearing the blood. Without thinking, Jasmine went to the sterile, high-tech bathroom and found a first aid kit. She came back and stood in front of him. Sit down, she said quietly. He looked at her, then at the kit, and for the first time in 3 years, he did what she said. He sat on the edge of the leather sofa. She opened the kit, her hands steady, and began to clean the wound with an antiseptic wipe. Her fingers gently tilted his head, and he let her. They were so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the faint scent of his cologne, bergamot and smoke, mingled with whiskey and blood. His eyes watched her face, not her hands, with a raw, unnerving intensity. He wasn't the untouchable boss of the Korean underworld right now. He was just a man, wounded and bleeding in his own home. Her touch was professional, detached, but the air between them crackled with everything left unsaid. In that moment, he was vulnerable, and he was letting her see it. It was the first crack in the armor he wore, a silent admission of a trust he probably didn't even know he was giving. The attack on the penthouse came without warning. One moment, the apartment was silent, wrapped in the hush of the 70th floor. The next, the world exploded. The armored glass of the windows spiderwebbed inward with a deafening groan, followed by the sharp, percussive crack of suppressed gunfire. Taehyun moved like lightning. He grabbed Jasmine, shoving her behind the enormous black marble bar just as bullets ripped through the space where she'd been standing. "Stay down," he roared, his voice a guttural command that cut through the chaos. He produced a sleek, black pistol from a hidden compartment under the bar, his movements economical and lethal. Men in black tactical gear were rappelling down the side of the building, smashing their way through the compromised windows. Park wasn't just sending a message anymore. This was an execution. Taehyun's men, Minjun and two others, materialized from the other rooms, returning fire with disciplined precision. The penthouse became a war zone of muzzle flashes and the splintering of expensive furniture. Jasmine huddled behind the bar, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. This was it. The violence she had run from had found her in the sky. She risked a glance over the marble countertop. Taehyun was a whirlwind of controlled violence, moving between columns, using the architecture as both shield and weapon. He fought like he did everything else, with a chilling, predatory grace. But there were too many of them. She saw one of Park's men break away from the main firefight, his eyes landing on her hiding place. He began to move along the far wall, flanking them, his weapon raised. Taehyun was pinned down, exchanging fire with two others near the windows. He didn't see him. Minjun was occupied. No one saw him but her. Panic and adrenaline surged through her in a hot wave. She wasn't a victim anymore.
She wouldn't be.
Her eyes darted around, landing on a ridiculously heavy crystal decanter full of whiskey. Without a second thought, she grabbed it. It weighed a ton. The man was getting closer, his steps silent and focused. He was 10 feet away. 5. Just as he raised his rifle to aim over the bar, she rose up. His eyes widened in surprise for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She swung the decanter with all her strength, a desperate, two-handed arc that connected with the side of his head with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the ground without a sound. The decanter slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the floor. Whiskey and blood pooled on the pristine white marble. She stared down at the man, at her hands. They were trembling, but not from fear. From the shock of her own action. She had crossed a line. The blood wasn't just on the floor. It felt like it was on her. The firefight was over in another minute. Taehyun's men were ruthlessly efficient. When silence finally fell, broken only by the whistling wind through the shattered windows, Taehyun was at her side. He knelt in front of her, ignoring the bodies, ignoring his men. His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs gently brushing her cheeks. His eyes were frantic, searching her for any injury. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with adrenaline. "Jasmine, look at me. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. His relief was a visible thing, a wave that washed over his features, softening the hard lines for a fleeting moment. He saw the unconscious man at her feet, the shattered decanter. He looked back at her, and his expression shifted into something new, something she had never seen before.
Awe.
Respect. He pulled her to her feet and into the safety of his study, away from the carnage. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep, shuddering tremor. He pushed a glass of water into her hands, his own hand shaking slightly as he did. He stood before her, the cold, untouchable crime lord stripped away, leaving only the man. His gaze was so intense it felt like a physical touch. "For 3 years," he began, his voice barely a whisper, Every time a car backfired, every time I saw a woman with your hair, I thought it was them, coming to finish a job. I lived in a world of ghosts. But seeing you here alive, he took a ragged breath. It is worse, because now, I can lose you all over again. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something far more terrifying, far more honest. It was a confession of his deepest fear, the one vulnerability he kept hidden from the world. And the truth came spilling out of her in return, raw and unplanned. I told myself I was hiding here because it was safe, she said, her voice trembling. That it was just about survival. But I saw you every day, Tae-hyun. From a distance. I saw you become this. And I didn't leave, she met his eyes, the full weight of her own choices settling upon her. I was lying to myself. They stood in the ruins of his fortress, the illusion of safety shattered forever. They had both confessed a dangerous truth. Their proximity wasn't just an accident of circumstance anymore. It was a choice, and it was a choice that was going to get them both killed. The aftermath of the attack was a cold, quiet hum of activity. Min-jun and his men were ruthlessly efficient, erasing all evidence of the firefight. By dawn, the shattered windows were being replaced, the bodies were gone, and the blood was scrubbed from the marble. The penthouse was being resealed, but the violation lingered in the air. Tae-hyun stood by the newly installed pane of glass, staring down at the city as it woke up, his posture rigid. Jasmine knew he wasn't admiring the view. He was scanning for threats, mapping out a war. He won't stop, she said from behind him. It wasn't a question. No, Tae-hyun replied without turning.
He showed his hand.
He made it personal. That was his mistake. What's the plan? She asked, walking to stand beside him. She was no longer a ghost or a prisoner. She was in this whether she wanted to be or not. Park thinks I am weakened, Tae-hyun said, his voice a low growl. He will expect me to retaliate directly, at his headquarters. It's what our fathers would have done. An eye for an eye. But you're not going to do that. He finally turned to look at her, a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, in his dark eyes.
No.
Park's real power isn't in his army of thugs. It's in a set of ledgers. They detail his connections to certain politicians and international shipping magnates. Without them, his empire is a house of cards. His father kept them in a vault in his office. I'm assuming the son is just as sentimental. So, you're going to steal them. I am going to erase them, he corrected. And him along with them. A cold knot formed in Jasmine's stomach. This was the final move. The one that would end everything, one way or another. But something felt wrong. It was too simple, too direct. He knows you'll come for the ledgers, Tae-hyun.
He'll be waiting for you.
The attack here, it wasn't just to kill you. It was to make you angry. To make you predictable. He considered her words, his gaze sharp. What are you saying? I'm saying the ledgers are bait. The real prize, the thing he's protecting, must be somewhere else. Her mind raced, sifting through 3 years of overheard conversations, of gossip from guards and drivers and cleaners who thought she was just part of the furniture. A memory surfaced. A new driver, bragging about the old man's new safe house, a traditional Hanok villa outside the city, a place of peace. But he'd also mentioned the technology, the state-of-the-art security. It was a fortress disguised as a sanctuary. He has a villa in Bukshan, she said suddenly. An old-style house. No one would ever suspect it holds anything important. Tae-hyun's eyes narrowed. He crossed his desk and pulled up a satellite map, typing furiously. An image of a serene, walled compound with a traditional tile roof appeared on the screen. My intel says this is his mother's residence. It's the perfect cover, Jasmine insisted. He'll have his main force waiting for you at his office tower, while the ledgers are sitting there, barely guarded. Tae-hyun stared at the screen, then at her. He saw not the woman he'd lost, but a strategist, an unexpected asset who saw the world from a different angle. He made a decision. Min-jun, he called. His lieutenant appeared instantly. Assemble a small team. We're changing the target. He looked back at Jasmine. You will stay here. It's too dangerous. No, she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Park's men have seen me.
They know who I am.
If your plan fails, this is the first place they'll come. My safety isn't here anymore. It's with you. She took a breath, steeling herself. Besides, they'll be looking for your soldiers. They won't be looking for a woman. I can get closer than any of your men can. He wanted to refuse. Every protective instinct in his body screamed at him to lock her away and shield her from the violence to come. But he looked in her eyes and saw not fear, but a hard, resolute determination that mirrored his own. He was a man who respected strength above all else, and he could not deny the strength he saw in her now. He gave a single, sharp nod. The decision was made. The villa was quiet, nestled in the hills, bathed in the soft light of the moon. As Jasmine had predicted, the security was focused on technology, cameras, pressure plates, laser grids, not manpower. There were only 4 guards visible. Taehyun and his team disabled the electronics with practiced ease, moving like specters in the manicured gardens. The plan was simple. Taehyun and his men would create a diversion at the front, drawing out the guards. That would give Jasmine a 2-minute window to enter through a rear service door, find the study, and retrieve the ledgers. She slipped through the door, her heart pounding. The house was silent and smelled of old wood and incense. She moved quickly, her memory of the blueprints Taehyun had shown her guiding her through the dark corridors. She found the study. A large, ornate scroll painting hung on one wall. Just as the intel had suggested, the safe was behind it. Her fingers, nimble and sure, worked the combination lock. She heard shouting from outside. The diversion had started. The lock clicked open. She pulled the heavy steel door, and there they were, 3 thick, leather-bound books. She grabbed them, her job almost done. That's when she heard a floorboard creak behind her. She spun around. Park Sun, a man with his father's cruel mouth and empty eyes, stood in the doorway. He held a gun, and it was pointed directly at her. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. "It seems my bait worked after all," he sneered. "Only I caught a different prize." He sent his ghost to do his dirty work. Behind him, she could see the firefight through the window. Taehyun was pinned down. This was the trap. It was never about the ledgers. It was about her. "Give them to me," Park commanded. Jasmine's mind raced. There was no escape, but she would not be his pawn. She looked at the heavy ledgers in her arms, then at the lit fireplace across the room. She made her choice. With a defiant cry, she hurled the ledgers not at him, but into the roaring fire. Park screamed in rage, a raw, animal sound. The paper caught instantly, centuries of his family's power turning to ash and smoke. That moment of distraction was all Taehyun needed. A shot rang out from the garden, and Park crumpled to the floor, a red stain blooming on his chest. Taehyun burst into the room, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't even glance at Park's body. His eyes were only on her, checking her for harm. He saw she was safe, and the tension drained from his shoulders. He looked at the fire, at the last vestiges of his rival's empire burning away. Then he looked at her. She hadn't been rescued. She had acted. She had saved them both. They returned to the penthouse as the sun rose, casting long shadows across the city. The war was over. A cost had been paid on both sides, in blood and treasure, but they had won. Jasmine's old life, her invisibility, was gone forever, burned away with those ledgers. She had stepped into his world, and there was no going back. He stood before her in the quiet of the morning, the lethal crime lord replaced by a man laid bare. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. There were no words of love, no promises of a gentle future. Their world did not allow for such things. "You were never just a ghost in my building," he said, his voice low and imbued with a truth that resonated deeper than any vow. "You are the foundation." It was not a declaration. It was an acknowledgement of her strength, her sacrifice, her place. He was no longer a man ruling a solitary empire. He was a man with something to protect and something to stand beside him. He stepped back, creating a space between them, and looked out at the vast, sprawling city that was now truly his. He didn't ask her to stay. He didn't need to. He simply held out his hand. Jasmine looked at his hand, strong and steady, the hand of a killer and a king. Then she looked at his face, at the man she had loved, lost, and found again in the crucible of violence. Taking his hand was not a promise of safety or a fairy tale ending.
It was a choice.
A promise of shared dawns, of facing down the darkness together. It was a life carved from shadow and steel. And slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand in his.